Sparta. The name itself conjures images of discipline, strength, and unwavering courage. We think of King Leonidas and his 300 warriors, a shining example of heroism against impossible odds. But what if I told you that this legendary strength was forged in a crucible of unimaginable cruelty? That behind the gleaming helmets and scarlet capes lies a story not of glory, but of profound human suffering. Today, we peel back the layers of myth to reveal the brutal, hidden reality of life in ancient Sparta. This is the story they didn't want you to know. To understand Sparta, you must first understand its deepest fear, the Helots. These were not just slaves, they were a conquered people, a vast population of serfs who worked the land and outnumbered the Spartan citizens perhaps 10 to 1. This constant, simmering thread of rebellion shaped every aspect of Spartan society. Their entire world was a military barracks, designed not for conquest abroad, but for control at home. The Spartan state didn't just need soldiers, it needed a perfect, unthinking, unbreakable human weapon. And the production of this weapon began at birth. The life of a Spartan citizen was not their own from the moment they drew their first breath. Newborns were inspected by the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. If the infant was deemed weak, sickly, or in any way imperfect, it was taken to a chasm known as the apotheke, the place of rejection, and left to die of exposure. There was no room for sentiment, no place for the weak. Survival was not a right, but a privilege granted only to those who met the state's rigid standards. This was the first and most brutal test in a life defined by them. For those who passed, the true ordeal was only just beginning. At the age of 7, a Spartan boy was torn from his family and enrolled in the Agoge, a state-sponsored training program that would consume the next 13 years of his life. This was not a school in any sense we would recognize. It was a systematic breaking of the individual spirit. The boys were organized into packs, living in communal barracks under the watch of older youths and state officials. Their heads were shaved, they were given a single cloak to wear year-round, and they slept on beds of reeds they had to cut themselves from the riverbank, with no knife. The goal was to strip away all sense of personal identity, comfort, and compassion, replacing it with loyalty to the pack and obedience to the state. The training was relentless. They endured brutal physical conditioning, forced marches, and constant drills with weapons. But the physical pain was perhaps secondary to the psychological torment. They were deliberately underfed, kept in a state of constant hunger. Why? To encourage them to steal. If a boy was caught stealing food, he was viciously flogged. Not for the act of stealing, but for the incompetence of being caught. This taught cunning, stealth, and a complete disregard for rules when survival was at stake, qualities of a perfect guerrilla fighter. Violence was a daily reality. The older boys were encouraged to bully and haze the younger ones, fostering a culture of internal competition and dominance. Fights were not just permitted, they were expected. It was a way to weed out the weak and toughen the rest. Every year, at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia, the boys underwent a ritual known as the diamastagosis. They were forced to stand before the altar and were flogged, sometimes to the point of death. The objective was to endure the whipping without crying out. To show any sign of weakness was the ultimate disgrace. This wasn't just training, it was a form of ritualized torture designed to hammer the fear of pain out of them. And what of education? They learned to read and write, but only enough for basic military orders and communications. The true curriculum was music and poetry, not for ART's sake, but for indoctrination. They learned patriotic war chants and memorized tales of Spartan heroes, reinforcing the ideals of courage, sacrifice, and absolute devotion to Sparta. There was no room for critical thinking, no space for philosophy or art that didn't serve the state's military purpose. The mind, like the body, was a tool to be sharpened for war. At the age of 20, the Spartan youth graduated from the Agoge, but freedom was still a distant concept. He now joined a session, a common mess hall, where he would dine with 15 of his peers for the rest of his active military life. This was a mandatory part of being a citizen. Even if he married, he did not live with his wife. He would sleep in the barracks, only sneaking out at night to visit her. The bond with his fellow soldiers was designed to be stronger than his bond with his own family. His life was not his own. It belonged to his dining club, his unit, and above all, to Sparta. This intense focus on the male warrior class had a devastating effect on the very fabric of society. Personal choice was an illusion. A man's profession was chosen for him, soldier. His life was dictated by the state from birth to death. The concept of freedom, the very ideal that we often associate with ancient Greece, was utterly alien in Sparta. There was no freedom of speech, no freedom of assembly outside of state-sanctioned events, and certainly no freedom to pursue a life of one's own choosing. And what of the women? Spartan women are often praised for their relative freedom compared to their Athenian counterparts. They could inherit property, were educated, and were encouraged to be physically fit. But this freedom served a single, grim purpose: to produce strong sons for the agoge. A Spartan woman's primary role was that of a broodmare for the state. Their famous stoicism in the face of loss, telling their sons to come back with your shield or on it, was not just a sign of personal strength, but a reflection of a society that had elevated the state above the most basic human connection, a mother's love for her child. The emotional cost of this system is immeasurable. Imagine a world where you are taught to feel pride, not grief, at the news of your son's death in battle. This brutal system created the most feared soldiers of the ancient world. On the battlefield, the Spartan phalanx was nearly unstoppable. Years of shared hardship in the agoge forged a bond between soldiers that was unbreakable. They moved as one, fought as one, and died as one. Their discipline was legendary. But this military perfection came at an enormous human cost. Sparta was a society built on a foundation of fear, control, and institutionalized cruelty. It sacrificed art, philosophy, individuality, and basic human kindness for the sake of military supremacy. It was a society that consumed its own children. While their neighbors in Athens were laying the groundwork for democracy, science, and theater, the Spartans were perfecting a system of human brutalization. The tragic irony is that the very system designed to preserve Sparta ultimately led to its downfall. The constant warfare, the ritual culling of infants, and the rigid, exclusive citizenship meant their population dwindled relentlessly. They were so focused on creating the perfect warrior that they failed to create enough of them. By the 4th century BC, the number of full Spartan citizens had collapsed, and their military dominance faded. They were a victim of their own success, a society so specialized it could not adapt. So the next time you hear the tales of Spartan glory, remember the price. Remember the infants left to die on a mountainside. Remember the 7-year-old boys torn from their mothers. Remember the constant hunger, the ritual beatings, and the complete annihilation of the self. The legend of Sparta is a powerful one, but it is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that true strength is not just found in discipline and martial prowess, but in compassion, freedom, and the value we place on every individual human life. The story of Sparta is not just history. It's a timeless warning about the dark path a society can take when it sacrifices its humanity for the illusion of perfect strength. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration of the darker side of history compelling, please consider subscribing and joining us for more dives into the stories you thought you knew.